There is no sound in this world more chilling than the voice of your own son directing where to dig your grave. There is no betrayal more vicious than realizing the hands you once guided are the same hands that hammered your coffin shut. One might think this is the script for a horror film, but it is the true story of my life. I, Joseph Hayes, at 75 years old, had to claw my way out of a grave planned by my own flesh and blood, carrying a truth almost too heavy to bear. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they might shake your faith. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. The smell of damp earth was the first thing I felt when I woke up inside that makeshift coffin. The second was the voice of my own son, saying where my grave should be dug. Right here is good. No deeper than this. Nobody's going to look for a missing old man on an abandoned ranch. He said it with a casualness that chilled my blood more than the damp wood on my back. My heart pounded, but my mind, thank God, remained calm, as only 70-some years of life can teach you. I took a deep, slow breath so as not to make a sound. While my eyes adjusted to the near-complete darkness, my hands were already feeling around, searching for anything I could use. A loose nail, a splinter of wood, a crack. At that moment, I realized that the decades spent working with locks would either save me, or I would be buried alive by my own child. My name is Joseph Hayes, but those who know me in Phoenix call me Old Joe. I've got 75 years on my back. I was born in a small town in Louisiana and ended up in this stretch of the Arizona desert more than 50 years ago, when I was just a young man with a suitcase of clothes and the promise of a job at a hardware store. It was in that store that I met my Emily, God rest her soul. We started as employees and ended up as owners of the place. A simple life of hard work, but honest and with its joys. Anyone who sees me today, all put together in my condo with a view of the mountains, small but paid for with sweat, can't imagine that this old man with gray hair and calloused hands has faced things not even horror movies show. I need to know how far this story will go because there are many people who doubt that a man of 75 has gone through this and survived. They think it's the invention of a senile old man seeking attention, but I have proof and I have scars. Some you can see, others I carry inside, like the one from knowing my own blood planned to bury me alive for money after my Emily passed away 10 years ago from a massive heart attack while fixing a lock. Ironic, isn't it? The woman spent her life opening doors only to leave this world through a door no one has a key to. My life settled into a gentle rhythm. I'd wake up early, make my strong coffee, grab my straw hat, and go for a walk in the park before the sun got too hot. I had my friends from the Wednesday bingo game, Frank, George, and Bill, who, to be honest, gossiped more than they played. Every now and then I'd go to the store, which was now in the hands of Marcus, our trusted manager of 30 years, just to take a look, see if everything was in order. The smell of sawdust and machine oil always brought back a flood of memories of Emily. And for a moment, it felt like she was right there beside me. It wasn't an eventful life, but it was mine. You know, it had comfort, it had peace. Then, one Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I nearly fell over. It was Daniel, my only son, whom I hadn't seen in person in 15 years. He was thinner. His hair was different, wearing clothes that looked expensive. "Hi, Dad," he said, as if he had seen me last week. I was speechless, my knees wobbling. The last time I had been with him was after Emily's brother's funeral, when we had that ugly fight about money. He stormed out, slamming the door, saying we were too cheap and he would never set foot in this house again. And he kept his word, you see. Nothing more than some printed birthday cards and a few short phone calls on holidays when he remembered. "Can I come in?" he asked. And I, being the fool I am, opened not just the door, but my arms and my heart. A father is like that, right? No matter how much time passes, no matter the hurt, when a child returns, we welcome them. As I held him, the memories flooded back. Daniel had always been different. While Emily and I were content with our simple life, he dreamt of mansions and imported cars, cutting pictures from magazines for his My Future notebook. The complaints started in his teens. Our house was too small, our clothes too cheap. The final straw came when he was 22. He demanded $50,000 for a risky business venture. And when Emily asked for a proper plan, he called us stingy. "One day I'll come back rich," he screamed before slamming the door, "and you'll regret not believing in me." And for 15 years, he kept his word with nothing more than a few printed birthday cards and a quick, cold appearance at his mother's funeral. But now, seeing him so broken on my sofa, all of that history melted away. He told me he was separated, that his rich wife had cheated and left him with nothing. "I spent years chasing an empty life, Dad," he cried. "I pushed away the only people who truly cared. And my father's heart, the one that never learns, believed every word." A father is like that, right? No matter how much time passes, no matter the hurt, when a child returns, we welcome them. He told me he was separated, that he had gone through some financial rough patches, his words, and that he had felt an immense desire to reconnect with me. "I'm in a phase of appreciating what really matters, Dad, and you matter. I want to take care of you now." He said it with those brown eyes, identical to his mother's. How could I not believe him? The first few days seemed like a dream. Daniel cleaned the house, did the shopping, cooked my favorite dishes. He even made the gumbo I had taught him to make as a boy, just like the way we made it back in Louisiana. He took me to doctors I didn't even know I needed to see. He organized my pills in boxes with alarms, bought new curtains for the bedroom. A perfect son, you know. I even felt guilty for having been so hurt by him for so long. "You see, Emily," I would think, looking at her portrait on the shelf, "our boy is back. You always said he would mature one day." He made a point of knowing everything about my life. He asked about my bingo friends, the neighbors, the hardware store, my schedules, my habits. At first, I thought it was genuine interest that he was trying to make up for lost time. He wrote everything down in a little notebook with tiny handwriting. "It's so I don't forget anything important about you, Dad," he would explain with a smile. Oh, how I missed the time when I still believed in that smile. One afternoon, while we were having tea on the balcony, he started asking more specific questions about the life insurance Emily had left. "How much was the policy, Dad? Have you received everything for the condo deed? Is it just in your name, or is there any pending probate? Your savings, do you keep it in a savings account, or do you have a better investment?" At the time, I didn't find it so strange. After all, a son should know these things about his elderly father, right? But today, thinking about it all from a distance, I see the signs my stubborn mind refused to see. It's a lonely and terrifying place to be, isn't it? When the person you should trust the most becomes the source of your deepest fear. Joseph's instincts are screaming, even if his heart refuses to listen. Stay with us as we uncover just how dark Daniel's care is about to become. One day, he showed up with a man in a suit, all dapper, a leather briefcase in hand. "Dad, this is Mr. Martin Vance, a lawyer friend of mine. He's here to help us organize your documents, to make things easier for the future." The so-called lawyer spoke to me as if I were a 5-year-old child, explaining basic concepts with that irritating patience. They wanted me to sign some papers to facilitate the transition of assets, to avoid future bureaucracy, for my own good. That day, I faked a bad dizzy spell so I wouldn't have to sign anything. Daniel was visibly annoyed, but hid it in front of the lawyer. "We'll try another day when you're feeling better," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was after that he started putting a strange little powder in my afternoon tea. I noticed that even after washing the cup well, a small white residue would be left at the bottom. The first day I noticed, I pretended to drink it and threw it into the living room plant when he wasn't looking. Poor Fern. The next day it was already wilted. Whatever that powder was, it was not good. I started pretending to drink the tea, throwing a little at a time into the pot by the window when he was distracted, or saying it was still too hot and letting it cool until he left the room. When I would pour it down the sink, the nights started getting strange too. I would wake up with the feeling that someone had been in my room, gone through my things. Objects would move. My glasses, which I always left on the nightstand, would appear on top of the dresser. The pillbox would be in a different order. The closet door I was sure I had closed would be ajar. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he would shake his head with a worried expression. "Dad, are you forgetting things? It's normal at your age. I'm worried about these memory lapses." Little by little, he planted the idea in my head, and in the heads of those who knew me, that I was becoming senile, that I could no longer make my own decisions, that I needed constant supervision. And the worst part is that I myself began to doubt my own sanity. Was I really forgetting things? Was I mixing up my medications? Was my mind no longer working properly? It's a terrible kind of psychological torture. You see, they make you doubt the one thing you are sure is yours, your own mind. And 3 months after his arrival, something happened that woke me up from this slow-motion nightmare. He had gone out quickly to buy bread, leaving his laptop open on the living room table. I've never been one to snoop, but something pushed me to take a look at the screen. It was open to a search page, and the history showed recent searches. How to fake natural death in the elderly, decomposition time of bodies in different soils, side effects of sleeping pills in people with high blood pressure. I felt a chill in my stomach I had never felt before. Not even when Emily died. Not even when I almost lost the store in a robbery in the 90s. It was a different kind of cold. The cold of someone who realizes the danger is inside the house, sleeping in the next room. I closed the laptop exactly as it was and went back to my room, my heart beating so hard I thought I was going to have a stroke right there. That night, I pushed the dresser against the bedroom door and slept, or rather stayed wide awake with a pair of scissors under my pillow. The truth is colder and sharper than any blade. In that instant, my world shrank to the size of my own home, now a prison with my own son as the warden. But this isn't a story about a victim. It's about a survivor. Keep listening to discover how a 75-year-old man begins to fight back against the unimaginable. The next morning, he served me coffee as if nothing had happened. He talked about the weather, a sale at the supermarket, a movie that was on television. And I, pretending I knew nothing, smiled and agreed while my mind was working like a machine. I had to be prepared for whatever he was planning. I couldn't confront him yet. He might do something drastic if he realized I had found out. I had to be smarter than him. That night, he came with a steaming cup in his hand. "I made a special tea for you, Dad. It's chamomile with lemon balm from Mrs. Miller's garden. It will help you sleep better." The tea had a strange color, darker than usual, and a sweetish smell that wasn't just herbs. I smiled, thanked him, and pretended to take small sips while we chatted about some soap opera. When he turned his back to fix a cushion, I poured some into the plant. When he left the room for a moment, I threw some more out the window. In the end, I pretended to have finished it all. "What a delicious tea, son. I'm even feeling a nice sleepiness coming on," I lied, faking a yawn. He smiled, satisfied, and helped me to my room. I lay down. I pretended that sleep was coming quickly. "Good night, Dad. Sleep well," he said, turning off the light and closing the door. As soon as I heard his footsteps fading away, I opened my eyes and stayed alert. Something told me this would not be an ordinary night. I don't know how long I lay there in the dark, pretending to sleep. It could have been an hour. It could have been 3. At some point, I heard my bedroom door open very slowly. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed, my body relaxed like someone in a deep sleep. I felt more than saw a presence approaching the bed. It was Daniel, I'm sure because of the cologne he wore. He stood there for a while watching. Then I heard a soft sigh and the sound of something being placed on the floor. It sounded like a bag or a backpack. "He's completely out," he whispered. I don't know if to himself or to someone on the phone. "Come pick us up in half an hour. I've arranged everything. No one will suspect a thing." I felt cold fingers checking my pulse, then lifting my eyelid. I remained motionless, as if I were really drugged. He left the room, leaving the door ajar. I waited a few minutes, then got up without making a sound. I had to find out what he had planned. I went to the door and peeked. The living room was in shadow, lit only by a small lamp. Daniel was on the phone with his back to me. "I've already arranged the insurance. Everything is set. $500,000 plus the condo, which must be worth over $800,000 now with that mountain view. No one will suspect. They'll think the old man left the house disoriented and got lost. It happens all the time with these senile old folks. I've already spread the story of his mental confusion to everyone. Yes, the box is in the car. I brought it from the old man's store. There's a certain irony, isn't there?" "Box? What box?" A shiver ran down my spine when I understood. A makeshift coffin. My own son had made a coffin with lumber from our hardware store to bury me. I went back to the room without making a sound. My head was spinning. I had to think fast. I opened the dresser drawer and took my documents, a little money I kept hidden inside an old Bible, and a photo of Emily. I put everything in a fanny pack I used for my walks and strapped it on under my nightgown. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I wouldn't go down without a fight. I went back to bed and resumed my position, pretending to be fast asleep. It didn't take long. I heard footsteps again, more than one person now. The door opened, and the hallway light briefly illuminated the room. "Are you sure he won't wake up?" a male voice whispered. "I gave him enough to knock out a horse," Daniel replied. "Let's go. Help me wrap him in the sheet." I felt hands lifting me, wrapping me in my own bedsheet. I kept my body limp, my breathing slow. They carried me out of the room, through the living room to the front door. I heard the sound of a parked car with the engine running. The night was cold, the desert wind hitting my face, partially covered by the sheet. They laid me down on the back seat of the car. "Drive carefully," Daniel instructed. "We don't want to get pulled over with an unconscious old man in the car." "Relax," the man replied. "At this hour, there's no one on the road to the ranch." The car started moving. Through a slit in the sheet, I saw we were leaving Phoenix, taking the highway that leads out to the desert. My heart was beating so hard I thought they could hear it, but they were chatting calmly in the front seat as if they were going for a Sunday drive. "How long until the insurance pays out?" the man asked at some point. "About 30 days after they declare his presumed death," Daniel replied. "I've already bribed the investigator not to look too hard. It'll look like he wandered off disoriented and probably died of exposure in the desert. And the condo, I can sell it as soon as I have the death certificate. I already have an interested buyer." They talked about my death, my house, my insurance money, with the same casualness as someone discussing a grocery list. I swallowed my tears, swallowed my fear. It wasn't time to feel. It was time to think, to plan. I had to survive to expose those two. After about an hour's drive, the car turned onto a dirt road. The bumps threw me from side to side on the seat, but I continued to pretend to be unconscious. Finally, we stopped. I heard the doors open. I felt the cold, pre-dawn air as they took me out of the car. "Get the shovel from the trunk," Daniel ordered. "The box is already here. Let's get this over with." They carried me a little further and then placed me on something hard. The box. Rough wood on my back, the smell of damp earth all around. I heard the sound of nails being hammered, sealing the lid above me. They didn't close it completely, leaving a crack through which a sliver of moonlight entered. Maybe they thought it wasn't worth spending too much time since I would never wake up anyway. And that's how I ended up in the situation I started this story with. Awake inside a makeshift coffin, listening to my own son direct where to dig my grave on an abandoned ranch in the Arizona desert. This is the moment where hope seems to die, buried under the weight of betrayal and damp earth. Every sound from the outside is another nail in the coffin of a life I once knew. But I carry something my son never counted on. A lifetime of skill and an unbreakable will. Don't go anywhere, because what happens next is a testament to the fact that you can't bury a spirit that refuses to be broken. The tea hadn't knocked me out as he expected, and now I had a chance, a small one, but a chance, to survive. As I listened to the sound of shovels digging into the earth, I began to feel the sides of the box, looking for a weakness, an exit. My fingers found a loose nail, poorly fixed in the cheap wood. The tea hadn't knocked me out as he expected, and now I had a chance, a small one, but a chance, to survive. As I listened to the sound of shovels digging into the earth, I began to feel the sides of the box, looking for a weakness, an exit. My fingers found a loose nail, poorly fixed in the cheap wood. He had also begun to meddle with my routine, always with the excuse of taking better care of me. First, it was the medications. "Dad, these medications you're taking are very old. There are much better things on the market today." "But son, I've been taking these for years. I do well on them. Dr. S always renews the prescriptions." "That doctor is outdated. I made an appointment with a new specialist, super renowned. He'll prescribe better things." And so in a few weeks, my little white blood pressure pills were replaced with blue ones that made me strangely drowsy. The pills for my joint pain, which I took rarely, became a daily regimen of capsules that left my mouth dry. There was always a new supplement, a new medicine, a new vitamin. "It's for your own good, Dad. You need to take better care of yourself at this age. Then it was my friends. Daniel began to create little intrigues, plant doubts, make seemingly innocent comments that slowly poisoned my friendships of decades. Did you know that Frank talks about your retirement savings behind your back? I heard him mentioning it to his daughter at the supermarket. George asked if you still have that piece of Grandpa's watch. I thought his interest was strange. Bill took a silver spoon when he came for coffee. I'm sure of it. I counted the set after he left and one was missing. I resisted at first. I defended my friends. What are you talking about, son? I've known Frank for 30 years. George was just being polite. He always admired that watch. Bill is too honest. You must be mistaken. But the constant dripping wears away the stone, doesn't it? After hearing these things so many times, I started to look at my friends differently, to doubt their intentions, to pull away. The Wednesday bingo game, which was the joy of my week, was the first thing to disappear from my routine. There was always some appointment, a doctor's visit, a sudden feeling of being unwell that prevented me from going. My friends would call, worried, but Daniel started answering the phone for me. Dad isn't feeling well today. Yes, I'll tell him you called. No, better not to visit now. He needs rest. The doctor recommended avoiding excitement. Little by little, the calls dwindled. The visits, which were already rare, stopped completely. I found myself isolated in my own condo, depending more and more on Daniel for everything: groceries, medicine, information from the outside world. He controlled who I heard from, who I spoke with, what I ate, what time I slept, all under the guise of care, of concern for my health. My morning walks in the park, which had been my daily pleasure since I moved to Phoenix, were also gradually reduced. There was always an excuse. The weather wasn't good. I looked tired. My blood pressure must be high. We'll go tomorrow, Dad. And tomorrow never came. By the time I finally realized what was happening, I was already quite fragile. Not physically, thank God. I've always been strong. But emotionally, I was isolated, confused, beginning to doubt my own memory and judgment. Daniel had created an environment where any questioning on my part was seen as mental confusion, an old man's stubbornness, or worse, a sign of encroaching senility. Because let me tell you, that chill can save your life. Mine saved mine. The lawyer friend started showing up more frequently. Mr. Vance, a man of about 45, slicked back hair, always in an impeccable suit, cologne too strong. He spoke to me as if I were 5 years old or had some comprehension problem. Mr. Hayes, we need to organize your documents, to make things easier for you in the future. Do you understand what a living trust is? Of course I understood. I was no fool. I had handled the store's finances for decades. I knew more about documents and bureaucracy than many accountants out there. But I pretended not to understand very well, buying time, observing. I started to notice the looks between him and Daniel, their body language, the knowing smiles. They weren't just acquaintances or friends. There was something more there. During one of his visits, when I went to the kitchen to get coffee, I came back silently and caught them in an embrace that was anything but professional. I backed away without a sound and returned, making more noise. They separated quickly, adjusting their clothes, feigning composure. I pretended not to notice anything. I served the coffee. I smiled like the naive old man they thought I was. These documents are important, Mr. Hayes, Mr. Vance insisted, pushing papers in my direction. It's to facilitate the transition of assets, avoid future bureaucracy, ensure your assets are protected. I looked at the papers, pretended to read with difficulty, asked him to explain terms I knew very well. On one of the pages, I saw something that chilled me: an authorization for the sale of the condo in case of the owner's physical or mental incapacity, to be certified by a designated physician. On another, a transfer of broad power of attorney, giving Daniel the power to manage all my assets and bank accounts. That day, I faked a bad dizzy spell. Oh, my blood pressure. Everything is spinning. Daniel was visibly irritated, but had to postpone the signing of the papers. We'll come back another day when you're feeling better, the lawyer said, putting the documents back in his briefcase. After he left, Daniel came with a cup of tea. Here, Dad, this will help you calm down. I noticed a white powder not completely dissolved at the bottom of the cup. It wasn't the first time I'd seen it, but now I was paying closer attention. I pretended to drink it, but poured the contents into the plant when he went to answer the phone. The next day, the plant's leaves were yellowed. Whatever that powder was, it was not good. The nights became increasingly strange. I would lock my bedroom door, but sometimes I would wake up with the feeling that someone had been inside. Objects would move. My glasses, my medicines, my small pieces of jewelry. When I mentioned this to Daniel, he would shake his head with an expression of studied concern. "Dad, you're becoming very forgetful. Just yesterday you were looking for your dentures for half an hour, and they were in your mouth." A detail. I have never worn dentures in my life. I still have all my own teeth, thank God. But he said these things with such conviction that for a second I almost believed him. He became more and more blatant. He answered all my calls, read my mail before I did, monitored my conversations with neighbors. "Dad has early onset Alzheimer's," I heard him say quietly to the building's doorman one day. "If he says anything strange, let me know, okay?" He was setting the perfect stage. An elderly man with cognitive problems, confused, forgetful, perhaps even paranoid, needing constant supervision. It was his word against mine, and he was planting seeds of doubt in everyone around me. Who would believe a senile old man against a devoted son who gave up his life to care for his sick father? Luckily, or perhaps by one of those chances God places in our path, I had my opportunity to confirm all my suspicions. One day, he went out quickly to buy bread from the corner bakery. He always took his purse and cell phone, but that morning he was running late to meet someone. I later found out it was the lawyer, and rushed out, leaving his laptop open on the living room table. I've never been one to snoop, I swear to God. But something pushed me to glance at the screen. The browser was open, and in the recent history, I saw searches that chilled me to the bone. How to fake natural death in the elderly, decomposition time of bodies in different soils, side effects of sleeping pills in people with high blood pressure, how to obtain a death certificate without a body. I closed the laptop exactly as it was and went back to my room, my legs weak. I locked the door and sat on the bed, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. It was no longer just a vague suspicion, a nameless fear. It was real, concrete, documented. My own son was researching ways to kill me. At that moment, I had to make a decision. I could confront him, scream, call the police, but if I did that, and he denied everything, if he played the confused father card, who would believe me? I had no concrete proof, only what I had seen on the computer. And knowing Daniel, he would have a perfectly plausible explanation for those searches. Maybe he'd say he was writing a crime novel or doing research for a lawyer friend on fraudulent inheritance cases. No, direct confrontation was out of the question. I had to be smarter than him. I had to pretend I knew nothing, that I was still the confused and dependent old man he thought I was. And in the meantime, I had to prepare for whatever he was planning. That night, I pushed the heavy dresser against my bedroom door and slept, or rather, stayed awake, with a pair of sewing scissors under my pillow. In the following days, I watched his every move with the eyes of a hawk while pretending to be increasingly frail and confused. It was a dangerous game, but I had no choice. It was my life that was at stake. And that's how we got to that fateful night when he came with the cup of special tea. I already knew there was something wrong with that tea. I had seen its effect on my plant days before, but this time I felt it was different. The smell was stronger, the color darker. Whatever he put in there, it was a larger quantity. It was the dose to knock out a horse that he would later mention to his accomplice. I pretended to drink it, threw it out when I could, and feigned drowsiness. The rest of the story I've already told, how I was placed in a makeshift coffin, how I heard my own son planning where to dig my grave, how I found a loose nail, which would be my only hope of survival. What I haven't told yet is how I managed to escape that coffin, and what I did for the next 6 months, living like a ghost in my own home, collecting evidence against my son while he believed me to be dead. I'll never forget that moment inside the coffin. The smell of damp earth filling my nostrils, the rough wood scratching my back through my thin nightgown. That almost complete darkness broken only by a sliver of moonlight coming through a small crack in the poorly nailed lid. I've been through a lot in this life, but nothing compares to the feeling of being trapped in a box, listening to the people who should love you digging your grave. Deeper, Martin. It has to be at least 5 feet. Daniel's voice sounded muffled through the wood, but I would recognize that bossy tone anywhere. It was the same one he used as a teenager, demanding new sneakers or money for parties. It's fine, Daniel. "No one is going to find an old man buried in the middle of nowhere," replied the male voice, which I now knew belonged to the lawyer, Mr. Vance. "This ground is hard as a rock, and it's getting late. The sun will be up soon. Don't be lazy. If someone finds the body before it's time, the whole plan goes down the drain," my son retorted irritably. "Digging deeper makes the decomposition faster. I read that online." My own blood was discussing the ideal depth for my decomposition. May God forgive me, but at that moment I felt a rage I never thought I was capable of feeling. It wasn't just fear. It was indignation so profound it gave me strength beyond what I imagined I had at 75 years of age. "Whatever," the man grumbled. "After we finish here, how long until the insurance pays out?" "About 30 days after the declaration of presumed death," Daniel replied, the sound of the shovel digging punctuating his words. "I've already bribed the investigator not to look too hard. It will look like he wandered out of the house disoriented and probably died of exposure in the desert. And that condo with the mountain view, is it really worth what you said?" "More than 800,000 easily. The realtor is already on standby. As soon as the death certificate is issued, I'll put it up for sale. In 60 days, we'll be rich, honey." Honey. The lawyer wasn't just an accomplice in the crime, he was Daniel's lover, probably the whole time ever since he came back to take care of me. All part of a cold, calculated plan to get my money, my house, my life. As I listened to that macabre conversation, my hands frantically felt the wood around me, searching for any flaw, any weakness. That's when I realized something. The wood felt familiar to the touch. The knots, the texture. It was second-rate pine, the same kind we sold in the construction section of our hardware store. My son had made my coffin with wood from his mother's store. There was a poetic cruelty in that which cut me deeper than any nail. I felt the first wave of panic rising in my throat, that primitive scream of terror that every human being has stored away for life-or-death situations. But I swallowed it back. Screaming now would be signing my death sentence. They would just finish the job more directly, perhaps with a shovel to the head before burying me. I took a deep, shaky breath and told myself, "Calm down, Joseph. Think. Use your head. You know wood. You know locks. You've worked with this your whole life. This makeshift coffin is no match for you." I continued exploring with my hands, inch by inch. On the right side, I found a protruding nail, poorly fixed, typical of a rushed job. I tried to move it with my fingers, but it was too firm to pull out without a tool. I needed something thin and sturdy to use as a lever. I felt my body, searching for anything I could use. The nightgown had no buttons. I wasn't wearing a necklace or bracelet. But then I remembered the safety pin I used to secure the waistband of my pajama pants, an old, sturdy one I always carried. Slowly, so as not to make a sound, I reached down and found it, almost crying with relief. I know you're probably thinking, what can an old man do with a pin? But when you've spent a lifetime feeling the smallest metal parts, every little tumbler in a lock, a pin isn't just a pin anymore. It's a tool. And Emily, God rest her soul, always reminded me, "Joe, the right tool, no matter how small, can open any door, even the door to a coffin." "Finished here," I heard the man say outside. "Come see if it's good." "It's perfect," Daniel's voice replied after a pause. "Now, let's have some coffee in the car while we wait for sunrise. I don't want to drive back in the dark on this dirt road." "And your father? Isn't it better to finish the job?" "No need. With the dosage I gave him, his heart should have already stopped. And even if it hasn't, he's locked in a box in the middle of nowhere, weak and doped up. There's no way he can escape." I heard footsteps moving away, the sound of a car door opening, doors slamming. They had gone to have coffee. Coffee, as if they had just finished a common task, like changing a tire or fixing a faucet, not burying their own father alive. Now was my chance. With the safety pin in hand, I started working on the loose nail. I positioned the tip of the pin under the nail head and carefully pried so as not to break my only tool. Years working in the store taught me to respect metal, to understand its resistance and its limits. The nail didn't budge on the first few tries. I changed the angle, trying to find the point of least resistance. Come on, I murmured softly, as if I could convince the nail to cooperate. My hands were shaking, not from fear now, but from effort and determination. On the fourth or fifth push, I felt the nail give a millimeter. That was all I needed. From there, I worked slowly, patiently, gradually increasing the gap. Every movement was calculated to make the least amount of noise possible. My whole body was sweating despite the cold of the early morning seeping through the cracks in the wood. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably about 20 minutes, I managed to loosen the nail completely. Now I had a better tool, a nearly 4-inch nail sharp at the tip. With it, I attacked the other nails around it one by one, methodically. Some came out with relative ease. Others required more force and ingenuity. I worked in absolute silence, stopping occasionally to listen if they were coming back. I could only hear distant fragments of conversation coming from the direction of the car. They were discussing details of how they would spend the money, completely oblivious to the fact that their victim was actively dismantling their plan, nail by nail. When I loosened the fourth nail, I was able to create an opening large enough to peek outside. The faint light of dawn was beginning to touch the sky, allowing me to see where I was. It was a clearing in a rural area, surrounded by low trees and vegetation, typical of the Arizona desert. A few feet from me, I saw the partially dug grave, my final destination in their plan. Further on, maybe 50 yards away, was a car that I recognized as Daniel's, a silver imported model, not very new, but still elegant. He and the man were sitting inside, drinking something from disposable cups, chatting animatedly, as if they were on a picnic. I continued working on the nails, now with more urgency. The day was breaking, and they would soon finish their coffee and come to complete the job. When I managed to loosen the sixth nail, the side of the coffin was loose enough for me to try to get out, but I couldn't rush. A sudden movement, a board breaking loudly, and they would come running. With extreme care, I pushed the sideboard outward, creating an opening. It wasn't large, but I was thin. The months of Daniel's care, with controlled meals and appetite-suppressing medication, had reduced my body. I squeezed through slowly, feeling muscles I hadn't used in years protest the effort. First, I got one arm through, then my head, then my shoulders, the hardest part. For a terrifying moment, I was stuck, my shoulder wedged in the irregular opening. I took a deep breath, relaxed my muscles as much as I could, and gave one last push. I slid out onto the soft earth beside the coffin, stifling a cry of pain as a piece of wood scratched my arm. Now I was out, lying next to the grave that was meant to be my tomb. The fresh morning air had never seemed so sweet, but I couldn't afford to savor freedom. I was still in extreme danger if they saw me. I looked again toward the car. They were still there, but now their body language had changed. They were leaning toward each other, kissing. I realized with disgust. I took advantage of their distraction to drag myself away from the coffin, toward a group of bushes a few yards away. Every movement was a controlled agony. My joints ached, my muscles trembled with exhaustion, and I had scratches and cuts from the nails and rough wood. But adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. Inch by inch, I moved away, using my elbows and knees to avoid raising dust, like a soldier crawling on an enemy field. When I finally reached the bushes, I allowed myself a moment to catch my breath. In that moment, huddled on the dirt, the only thing louder than my own heart was the silence I'd left behind. The terror was still there, like a cold snake in my gut. But something else was born in that silence too. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. Now it was about making sure my son knew exactly who he had tried to bury. From there, I could still see the car and the abandoned coffin, but they couldn't see me. I watched as they finished their coffee, threw the cups out, and started walking back toward the grave. The distance didn't allow me to see their expressions when they discovered the empty coffin, but Daniel's scream of rage cut through the morning air like a knife.
"Where is he? Where is he?"
he shrieked, running around like a madman, searching the immediate surroundings. Impossible. He was drugged, the lawyer replied, sounding more scared than furious. No one could get out of there in that state. He has to be nearby. Let's look. I shrank further into the bushes, trying to make my 75-year-old body seem smaller than a child's. They began to search the area, each going in a different direction. Daniel was coming dangerously close to me, using a branch as a stick to beat the low vegetation. At that moment, as if sent from heaven, the man's cell phone rang. The shrill sound broke the morning silence. Hello? Yes, this is he. What? No. Impossible. I'm out of town. Are you sure it's today? I thought it was next week. Damn it. I can't miss that hearing. Daniel stopped searching and went back to him, visibly irritated by the interruption. I only heard fragments of the heated argument that followed. Something about an important case, a rich client, the need to return to Phoenix immediately. And the old man? The lawyer asked, looking around nervously. He must have dragged himself into the brush, Daniel replied, his voice tense with anger. But he won't get far. He's weak, confused, in the middle of nowhere. Either he dies of exposure or some animal finds him first. One way or another, the problem solves itself. And what if someone finds him, if he talks? Who's going to believe a disoriented old man who says his own son tried to kill him? They'll think it's senile delirium. I've been planting that seed for months. Everyone in Phoenix knows my father is losing his mind. They argued a bit more, but the lawsuit seemed really important. Too important to risk losing over an old man who already had one foot in the grave anyway, as the lawyer brutally put it. Finally, they decided to leave. But not before Daniel gave a final warning. If by some miracle you survive and come back home, Father, know that I will finish what I started. No one will believe you. No one. The words hung in the air like poison as I watched them get in the car and drive off, kicking up dust on the dirt road. Only when the sound of the engine completely faded did I allow myself to take a deep breath and assess my situation. I was alive. That was the main and miraculous fact. But I was also alone, weak, wearing only a thin nightgown, without water, food, or money, in the middle of an abandoned rural property miles from anywhere. The sun was beginning to rise in the sky, promising a hot day typical of the Arizona summer. I stood up with difficulty, my muscles protesting every movement. I needed to get my bearings. Looking around more carefully, I began to recognize certain landmarks. That old mesquite tree, the rock formation near what was once a corral, the outlines of the ruined house in the distance. With a jolt, I realized where I was. The old Preston Ranch, a friend of my late wife Emily. We used to come here for barbecues in the 80s when the ranch was still operating, producing alfalfa and cotton. Mr. Preston died without direct heirs, and the property fell into a legal limbo, abandoned for at least 15 years. It was the perfect hiding spot, close enough to Phoenix to be convenient, isolated enough for no one to find a body. Knowing where I was, I could orient myself better. The highway was to the east, maybe about 2 miles through abandoned fields and a small stretch of brush. Under normal conditions, it would be an easy walk. In my current condition, weak, dehydrated, still with traces of the drugs in my system, it would be quite a challenge. But what was the alternative? Stay there and wait for death to truly arrive? I started walking slowly in what I thought was an easterly direction, guiding myself by the morning sun. Each step was a small triumph. The thin nightgown offered little protection against branches and shrubs. Soon my arms and legs were covered in scratches. My bare feet encountered sharp rocks and hidden stumps in the tall grass. After about 20 minutes of painful walking, I found an old well. By some miracle, it still had water. It wasn't clean, it was green with algae, and had insects swimming on the surface, but in my situation it looked like an oasis. I bent down and drank a little, just enough to wet my parched throat. I also washed my face and arms, feeling the coolness renew my strength. Near the well were the remains of a tool shed. The structure had collapsed, but among the debris I found something precious. An old rubber boot. Just the left one. Much larger than my size, but it was better than nothing. I also found a piece of tarp that I tied over my shoulders like a makeshift cloak. Thus equipped, a boot on one foot, the other bare, a tarp as a cloak, I resumed my journey. The sun rose relentlessly in the sky, and the heat began to become a new enemy. My mouth dried out quickly, and dizzy spells came in waves, but I kept walking one step after another, repeating to myself, "You survived the coffin. You'll survive this too." I don't know exactly how long I walked, 2 hours, maybe 3. The sun was already high when I finally heard the distant sound of cars, the highway. I found strength I didn't know I still had, and quickened my pace. The vegetation thinned out until I saw the asphalt shimmering in the heat. There, at the edge of the road, I faced a new dilemma. Asking for help was risky. I was dirty, disheveled, wearing a torn nightgown, a single boot, and a filthy tarp over my shoulders. Who would stop for an old man looking like this? And if they did stop, what would I say? My son tried to bury me alive. It would sound like delirium, exactly as Daniel predicted. Besides, what if the news that I was found reached him before I could properly protect myself? He would finish the job. Of that I had no doubt. And this time, he would be more careful, leaving no chance for escape. It was there, shivering under the relentless sun, that I made the hardest decision of my life. I would not ask for help, not yet. I would let them think I was dead, missing, whatever. It's a chilling calculation to have to make. The very systems designed to protect you have been turned against you. For Joseph, walking out of the desert wasn't the end of his ordeal. It was the beginning of a new silent war. To win, I would have to become the very ghost my son thought he had created. I would use this time to recover, gather evidence, build a solid case against my son and his accomplice. Only then would I reveal myself with all the cards in my hand. But for that, I needed to get back to Phoenix on my own without being recognized. I watched the cars pass for a few minutes, planning my approach. Finally, I saw an old truck slowing down on an uphill stretch. I came out of my hiding place and waved, hoping the driver was the sympathetic type. The truck stopped a few yards ahead, and a middle-aged man with stubble and a worn-out cap stuck his head out. "Need some help, sir?" I quickly improvised a story. "My son dropped me off at his house and went to work, but there was a kitchen fire. I managed to get out, but my clothes caught fire. I need to get to Phoenix to find my brother." It wasn't a very convincing story, but the man didn't ask many questions. Maybe he concluded I was just a confused old man who had gotten lost. Or maybe he saw the genuine desperation in my eyes. "Hop in the back, old-timer. I'm heading to Mesa. From there you can catch another ride to Phoenix." I thanked him with tears in my eyes and climbed into the truck bed, hiding among crates of produce. The wind in the open truck dried the sweat from my body and brought some relief from the heat. I closed my eyes, exhausted beyond comprehension, but still afraid to sleep. What if this was all a dream? What if I woke up back in the coffin? From Mesa to Phoenix, I managed to get a ride with an elderly couple who were returning from visiting their son. I told them a modified version of the fire story, and they were so compassionate that they insisted on giving me an old t-shirt from the husband and a wide-brimmed hat from the wife to protect me from the sun. It was late afternoon when I finally arrived on the outskirts of Phoenix. I asked to be dropped off at a random bus stop far from my neighborhood. I needed to think about my next step. I couldn't just go back home. Daniel would probably be there. And even if he wasn't, it would be the first place he'd look for me. Sitting at that bus stop, a ragged old man no one would look at twice, I began to formulate my plan. First, I needed a place to stay, some hideout where I could recover and plan my next moves. Then I would need money, documents, some way to move around without being detected. But above all, I needed to understand exactly what Daniel was doing, what the extent of his plan was, who else was involved besides the lawyer, how much of my money had already been siphoned off. Only with these answers could I adequately protect myself and ensure he paid for what he did. The obvious solution would be to go to the police, but without concrete evidence, it would be my word against his. And he had planted the seed of doubt in everyone around me. The elderly father with cognitive problems, confused, maybe even paranoid. As I myself had heard him say to his lover, "Who's going to believe a disoriented old man who says his own son tried to kill him?" I needed to be smarter. I needed irrefutable proof. And to get that proof, I needed to be where he would least expect me. Right under his nose, watching his every move, recording every incriminating word. That's when I made the riskiest and, in retrospect, the bravest decision of my life. I would return to my own home, but not through the front door. I would live hidden like a ghost in the one place he would never look for me, the storage closet he didn't even know existed. The condo building was old, built in the late 70s and full of forgotten quirks. One of them was a disused janitor's closet in the basement, tucked away behind the water heaters. Emily and I discovered it years ago when a pipe burst. It wasn't on any of the building's official floor plans, and over the decades, everyone seemed to have forgotten it existed. It became our secret storage spot for old paint cans and tools we rarely used. Daniel didn't know about this place. He was already long gone from home when we found it, and in the few times he visited, he never had any interest in exploring the dusty corners of the building, as he called them. That would be my refuge, my headquarters for the most important operation of my life, proving that my own son had tried to kill me, and ensuring he paid for it. With this plan in mind, I waited for nightfall before starting to move toward my building. Phoenix, like any big city, has its shadows where invisible people move unnoticed. That night, I was one of them, just another homeless old man looking for a place to sleep. I reached my building around 10 p.m. I knew every inch of that place, every blind spot of the security cameras, every shift change of the doormen. I knew, for example, that at 10 sharp, Mr. Antonio always went to the bathroom, leaving the front desk empty for exactly 7 minutes. More than enough time for someone to slip in through the back, where the lock on the service door had been broken for months. I entered unseen and went up the service stairs to the basement where the closet was. Using a technique Emily had taught me decades ago, I managed to open the simple door with a piece of wire I found on the way. Inside was exactly as I remembered, a 6x6-foot cubicle full of old brooms, cracked buckets, and expired cleaning products. But to me, at that moment, it felt like a palace. I arranged a corner as best I could, using old burlap sacks as a makeshift mattress. I was exhausted beyond physical comprehension and emotionally drained by everything I had been through in the last 24 hours. But before I allowed myself to rest, I had to do one thing: check if Daniel had already reported me missing. I knew that on the 11th floor lived Mrs. Peterson, one of my bingo friends whom Daniel had alienated me from. She always left her kitchen window open, and from there you could hear everything happening in her apartment, including the television she kept at a deafening volume due to her hearing loss. I crept up to the 11th floor and positioned myself near her kitchen window. As expected, the television was on at full blast, and it was the local news. The anchor was speaking in that serious tone reserved for tragic news. The disappearance of Mr. Joseph Hayes, 75, who suffers from early-stage Alzheimer's. According to his son, Daniel Hayes, his father left the house during the night while everyone was asleep and has not been seen since. The police are asking that any information about the elderly man's whereabouts be reported immediately. My face appeared on the screen, a recent photo taken by Daniel himself, where I looked particularly frail and confused. Beside it, my son was crying crocodile tears, begging for help to find his dear, disoriented father. His plan was in full swing. I was officially missing, probably dead, a victim of my own mental confusion. Soon, if no one found me, there would come the declaration of presumed death. Then the insurance, the sale of the condo, everything he and his lawyer lover had planned. Little did they know that the disoriented old man had not only escaped being buried alive, but was now about to become the hunter, no longer the prey. I returned to my hiding place in the basement, my head buzzing with plans. I would need supplies, tools, a way to record conversations and movements. I would need to observe Daniel's routine, discover his contacts, his accomplices, his passwords. I would need to be patient, methodical, ruthless. But all of that was for the next day. That night, I finally allowed myself to collapse on my makeshift bed. I was alive against all odds. I had survived the worst my own son could do to me. What came next would be difficult, dangerous, perhaps even more challenging than escaping the coffin. But one thing I was sure of: Daniel had made the worst possible mistake. He had underestimated his father. The first week of living like a ghost in my own home was the hardest. My makeshift apartment in the storage closet was the size of a large wardrobe. I could barely lie down stretched out. The cold concrete floor, even with the burlap sacks I used as a mattress, punished my old bones during the night. There was no bathroom, of course, so I had to use a bucket in emergencies and empty it in the middle of the night when no one would be around. Food was another problem. I only had what I could scavenge from the building's trash cans or leftovers left in the staff break room. But none of that mattered compared to what I needed to do. For the first few days, I dedicated myself to learning the rhythms of the building. The doormen's schedules, the cleaning ladies, the superintendents, the residents' routines. I knew I would have to move through the building without being seen, and that required detailed knowledge of every corner, every camera blind spot, every moment of staff distraction. Most importantly, of course, was understanding Daniel's movements. He had taken over my apartment as his own, sleeping in my room, using my things, pretending to mourn my loss to neighbors and friends. In the first few days after my disappearance, he maintained an appearance of appropriate grief. Red eyes, dark clothes, a trembling voice. But even in those moments, I saw flashes of what he really felt. The restrained smile when he talked on the phone about resolving pending matters. the expensive glass of wine he drank alone at night, silently celebrating his successful plan. To access my own apartment without being seen, I used a trick Emily and I had discovered years ago. Our building, like many old ones in Phoenix, had ventilation ducts that connected the floors, small, dusty, forgotten by the current management. The duct that passed through my bathroom had an opening large enough for someone my size to get through, as long as you knew exactly where the entrance was, hidden behind a false panel in the service hallway. On the third night, when I was sure Daniel was fast asleep thanks to the 2 bottles of wine he drank celebrating with the lawyer, I made my first foray into the apartment. I slid through the duct, feeling spiderwebs stick to my face, and carefully opened the panel that led into the cabinet under the bathroom sink. Moving like a cat, I explored my own home as an intruder. What I found disgusted me. Daniel was already changing everything. My picture frames were turned face down on the shelves. My clothes were piled in donation boxes. Decorator catalogs were spread across the table. In the room that had been mine for decades, his clothes already occupied half the closet. On the nightstand, a handwritten list caught my attention. Things to sell, divided by throwaway. It was practically an inventory of my life: furniture, jewelry, mementos, all with little notes about estimated value or trash. But what interested me most was in the office. There, in a desk organizer, I found a folder labeled with my name. Inside were copies of my will, the real one, the life insurance policy, the condo deed documents, and more. Falsified versions of these same documents with subtle changes that benefited Daniel. A power of attorney with my signature, obviously forged, giving him full control over my assets. A medical certificate signed by a doctor I had never heard of, declaring that I suffered from early-stage senile dementia. I took pictures of everything with an old cell phone I found in the building's trash and managed to get working. It had no SIM card, but the camera served to document evidence. Then silently, I put everything back in its exact place and returned to my hiding spot. I needed more, much more than documents. I needed to hear confessions, plans, details of the crime, and for that, I needed listening equipment. The problem was I had no money to buy anything sophisticated, and I couldn't risk leaving the building much. That's when 50 years of working with hardware proved more useful than ever. With parts collected from the trash, old wires, components from broken radios, fragments of discarded cell phones, I began to assemble makeshift microphones. Now don't go thinking I turned into some fancy spy. It was nothing like that. It's just about knowing what connects to what. When you've spent a lifetime fixing everything from a faulty doorbell to a blender motor, you learn that most things are just wires and a bit of power. Those microphones weren't pretty or sophisticated, but they worked. I just had to connect them to the old cell phone, which recorded everything to its internal memory. Over the next few nights, whenever Daniel left, I would sneak into the apartment and install my bugs in strategic locations. Under the dining table, where he often talked with the lawyer. Behind the living room sofa, taped under the headboard of the bed. Small, camouflaged, practically invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. The recordings I got in those first few weeks confirmed my worst suspicions. Daniel and Mr. Vance, who I now knew had been his lover for at least a year, had not only planned my death, they had done the same to other elderly people. The old man from Glendale's case was easier, I heard the lawyer say one night while drinking wine on my sofa. That one really did have Alzheimer's. No one questioned it when he got lost during a walk in the park. "And that widow from Peoria?" Daniel asked, laughing. "What was her name again?" "Mrs. Nelson. That one was tricky. Remember her son showed up out of nowhere from the United States? We had to wait another 6 months to wrap it up, but it was worth it. That condo on the canal brought in a good chunk of change." My blood ran cold as I realized I wasn't their first victim. There was a pattern, a perverse business of preying on vulnerable elderly people, isolating them, forging documents, and then making them disappear. How many others had been buried alive as they tried to do to me? How many families believed their fathers or grandfathers had simply wandered off due to old age? The police also came to the apartment a few times, always accompanied by a tearful Daniel. Hiding in the ventilation duct, I heard the investigator, a man with a tired and disinterested voice, say that missing elderly cases rarely had a positive outcome. "Usually they either wander into the desert, sir, or they're victims of a robbery, and the body is disposed of. After 2 weeks, the chances of finding them alive are almost zero." I understand, Daniel replied with a perfect tremor in his voice. But how long do we have to wait to, resolve the practical matters? The condo, the bills? By law, it's 30 days of intensive searches. After that, you file for a declaration of presumed death, which takes another 30 days or so to be issued if there's no contestation. After the officer left, Daniel immediately called the lawyer. 60 days, honey. Do you have a buyer for the condo yet? The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. My life in the hideout was one of extreme deprivation. I ate what I could scavenge. I used the building's facilities only in the dead of night. I bathed rarely, using the garden hose out back when I was sure no one would see. The chill of the approaching fall punished my bones, and I had only a thin blanket I found in the janitor's closet. Several times I was almost discovered. One night, the cleaning lady decided to do a spring cleaning in the storage room where I was hiding. Luckily, I was on one of my expeditions through the building. When I returned, I found everything reorganized. But my little corner behind the old boxes was untouched. She simply hadn't looked carefully enough to notice the signs of my presence. Another time, the superintendent came in while I was sleeping. I woke up to the sound of the door opening and only had time to curl up even tighter in my dark corner, holding my breath. He grabbed some tools and left without realizing someone was living there. The loneliness was perhaps the hardest part. You might be wondering how a person can live like that, like a rat in the walls. Let me tell you, you don't live. You endure. Every ache in your bones, every hunger pang, it all just becomes fuel. It reminds you why you're there. You learn to make yourself small, smaller than a ghost, all for that one moment when you can finally prove you're still alive. I spent weeks without exchanging a word with anyone, only listening to others' conversations, watching life happen around me without being able to participate. I missed my bingo friends, the chats with the doorman, even the arguments with the lady at the bakery about which bread was freshest. The only company I had were the cockroaches and a spider that made its home in a corner of the ceiling. I named it Emily, in honor of my late wife. At least it protected me from the mosquitoes. But the silence was the worst part. Not the absence of noise, but the weight of it. In the long, cold hours between my expeditions, I would sit in the dark and feel the full force of my son's betrayal. It wasn't a sharp, clean pain like a knife wound. It was a slow, seeping poison. I would trace the lines on my own hands, hands that had taught him how to ride a bike, fixed his toys, held him when he was sick, and wonder at what point they had become the hands of a stranger to him. I replayed every memory, every birthday, every argument, searching for the exact moment the rust began to form on his soul. Did the little boy who loved my gumbo ever truly exist? Or was he just a role played by the monster who was waiting to emerge? In that dusty closet, I mourned my son twice. Once for the man he had become, and again for the child I now realized I may have never truly known. My biggest fear was getting sick. At 75, without my blood pressure medication, without medical care, any health problem could be fatal. I developed a persistent cough from the dampness of the storage room, and there were nights when fever made me delirious. In those moments, I almost gave in, almost ran out, screaming for help. But then I would remember Daniel's voice, planning where to dig my grave, and the anger gave me renewed strength. The turning point in my situation came from where I least expected it. The building received deliveries of bottled water every Thursday. The delivery guy, a skinny young man of about 25, always left the jugs in the service hallway near my hiding place. From watching him so much, I learned his routine. He always checked the previous deliveries to see how much each apartment consumed to predict the following week's demand. One day I heard him mutter to himself, "Strange. Apartment 5B always ordered 2 jugs a week when there were 2 people. Now that there's only 1, it's still consuming the same amount." 5B was my apartment. Daniel alone shouldn't have been using as much water as he and I did together. But he was, because he took a bath every night, a luxury I, being frugal, rarely allowed myself. The following week, the young man, Ryan, according to his name tag, returned with the same observation. This time he added, "And the trash looks like it's from 2 people, too. Something strange is happening in that apartment." I made a risky decision. As he was leaving, I opened a crack in the closet door and whispered, "Mister, He nearly dropped the water jugs in fright. He looked around, confused, until he saw me partially hidden in the darkness. "Who are you? What are you doing in there?" "I'm the owner of 5B, the one who disappeared," I whispered, making air quotes. His eyes widened. "The old man who vanished? The father of the guy who cries every time I deliver water?" "The very same, but I can't explain everything right now. I need help." He hesitated, looking around, clearly thinking I was some kind of ghost or an escapee from somewhere. But something in my eyes must have convinced him. "What do you need?" "Food, blood pressure medicine, and a cell phone with a SIM card if possible on your next delivery." A week later, he left a bag hidden behind the empty jugs. Inside, I found bread, fruit, a bottle of water, generic blood pressure pills, and a cheap prepaid cell phone with credit. There was also a note. "My grandmother also suffered with kids who only wanted her Social Security. You can count on me." Ryan became my guardian angel and informant. Every week he brought basic supplies and information he picked up on his deliveries, who was entering and leaving the apartment, conversations he overheard, suspicious movements. It was through him that I found out Daniel was already interviewing realtors to sell the condo as soon as the death certificate was issued. With better food and the right medication, my health stabilized and I could focus completely on gathering evidence. The phone Ryan brought was crucial. Now I could record conversations with better quality and store the files securely. One Thursday, about 3 months after my disappearance, I captured a particularly incriminating conversation. Daniel and the lawyer were drunk, celebrating prematurely. "The judge is signing the declaration of presumed death next week," Mr. Vance said excitedly. "I spoke with my contact at the courthouse. It's all set." "Finally," Daniel replied. The sound of clinking glasses followed. "How long until the insurance pays out?" "Another 30 days for the bank transfers. But the buyer for the condo is ready to close as soon as the declaration is issued. We could have half the money in 2 weeks, $800,000 for the condo plus $500,000 from the insurance. Almost $1 million. We can buy that house in San Diego we saw. There will be money left over to invest and still take a trip to Europe." "Your plan was perfect, honey. Much better than the other cases. Gradual isolation, deterioration of mental image, no suspicion. The only mistake was not checking if he had actually died in the coffin," Daniel said with a slightly bitter tone. "But whatever. Even if he survived for a few hours, he ended up dying somewhere on that ranch. No one will find the body. And even if they do, they'll think he wandered off and died of natural causes. Can you imagine if he had managed to come back?" The lawyer laughed. "It would be like a horror movie. The ghost of the father coming back to haunt the evil son." "It's not funny, Martin. He could have ruined everything." If only they knew the ghost was just a few yards away, recording every word. As the weeks passed, I put together a complete dossier. In addition to the recordings, I had photos of the forged documents, copies of printed emails I found where they discussed other similar cases, even the proof of payment to the investigator who was bribed not to look for me too hard. But the final piece of the puzzle came when I decided to investigate the other cases they mentioned more deeply. Using the phone Ryan gave me, I searched for missing elderly people in Glendale and Peoria in recent years. I easily found the cases: a 78-year-old man with Alzheimer's who got lost during a walk in the park, and an 81-year-old widow who left her house disoriented and was never seen again. In both cases, close relatives, a niece in the first case, a daughter in the second, sold the properties and received insurance payouts shortly after the declarations of presumed death. With more investigation, I discovered that the same lawyer, Mr. Martin Vance, had represented the families in both cases. It was the complete criminal pattern. I had enough evidence to take Daniel and the lawyer to justice, but there was still a crucial problem. How could I, a dead man, present this evidence without being immediately dismissed as a lunatic, or worse, being permanently silenced by the pair when they discovered I was alive? I needed someone in the police, someone who would listen to my story with an open mind and protect my safety. Through Ryan, I learned of a detective who specialized in crimes against the elderly, Detective Miller. She had recently broken up a ring that scammed retirees and had a reputation for being incorruptible. Using the phone, I sent an enigmatic email to the police station mentioning the Glendale and Peoria cases, suggesting a connection and promising compelling evidence. I signed off only as a witness. To my surprise, I received a reply the same day with a personal phone number and the message, "Call me. We can speak discreetly." After 5 months of living as a ghost, collecting evidence, surviving in the shadows, I finally had an ally. I called the provided number from a payphone near the building during one of my rare nightly outings. Detective Miller, this is Joseph Hayes. You've probably heard of me. I'm the elderly man who disappeared in Phoenix 5 months ago. Except I didn't disappear. My own son tried to bury me alive. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the calm, professional voice of the detective. Mr. Hayes, that is a very serious accusation. Can you prove what you're saying? I have recordings, documents, photos, and most importantly, I'm alive when I should be dead. We scheduled a meeting for the next night at a neutral location, the house of a trusted friend of the detective on the outskirts of Phoenix. It would be risky to leave my hiding place for so long, but I had no choice. It was time to emerge from the shadows and reclaim my life. That night, on my way to meet with Detective Miller, I felt a pit in my stomach that had nothing to do with my 6 months living in the storage closet. It was fear mixed with hope. Fear that something would go wrong, that they wouldn't believe me, that Daniel would find out too soon. Hope of finally getting my life, my identity, my dignity back. Ryan helped me get to the agreed-upon location, a simple house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Phoenix. He drove his old car there, dropping me off 2 blocks away as a precaution. Good luck, Mr. Hayes, he said, squeezing my hand warmly. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Detective Miller was waiting for me on the porch. A woman in her 50s, short gray hair, an attentive gaze that seemed to assess every detail. When she saw me, her eyes widened slightly. Perhaps she expected someone less haggard, less aged by months of deprivation. Or maybe she was just surprised to see a dead man walking toward her. Mr. Hayes? She asked, extending her hand. What's left of him? I replied, trying to smile. Inside the house, I met the detective's friend, a retired social worker who had worked with elderly victims of family violence. The atmosphere was welcoming, with hot tea and cookies on the table. For the first time in months, I felt a bit of the comfort of a real home. I told my story from beginning to end, omitting nothing. Daniel's return after years of estrangement, the gradual isolation he imposed, the suspicious medications, the night of the special tea, the coffin, the ranch, my dramatic escape, then the months living in hiding, collecting evidence, surviving in the shadows of my own home. As I spoke, I opened the evidence folder, the audio recordings, the photos of the forged documents, the proofs of bribery, the research on the other similar cases in neighboring cities. The detective listened with full attention, making occasional notes, her face hardening as the scope of the crime became clear. In 23 years on the force, she finally said, I've never seen anything like it. The sophistication of the plan, the cruelty, and your resilience, Mr. Hayes. It's extraordinary that you survived, let alone managed to gather all this evidence. What happens now? I asked, exhausted after reliving it all. Now, she replied with a determined gleam in her eyes, we plan how to catch your son and the lawyer red-handed with irrefutable evidence and how to do it while ensuring your safety. We spent the next 2 hours devising the plan. The detective explained that although my evidence was substantial, a stronger case would be built if we could catch them openly discussing the crime, or even better, confessing. For that, we would need a carefully planned trap. When exactly is the declaration of presumed death issued? She asked. According to what I heard on the recordings, it should be next week, and the insurance pays out within 30 days after that. Perfect. We'll move when the money hits his account. That's when they'll be most confident, most careless. The plan was bold, but simple in essence. I would rise from the dead at the exact moment Daniel and the lawyer were celebrating their success. The police would be in position, recording everything. My sudden appearance, if all went as expected, would provoke reactions and perhaps impulsive confessions. Are you sure you want to do this, Mr. Hayes? The detective asked with concern. You'll be face to face with people who tried to kill you. We can find another approach. I am absolutely sure, I replied without hesitation. I want to look my son in the eyes when he realizes he has failed. I want him to know he underestimated the old man he tried to bury. In the following weeks, I remained in my hiding place. But now, with a crucial difference, I was no longer alone. Detective Miller kept in regular contact through the phone Ryan had given me, updating me on the case's developments. A small team of trusted police officers was assigned to the operation, all sworn to absolute secrecy. Meanwhile, through my listening devices, I followed Daniel's preparations. As predicted, the declaration of presumed death was issued, and the insurance process moved forward without a hitch. He already had interested buyers for the condo and was planning a small celebration for when the insurance money came through. "Just the two of us, honey," he said to the lawyer one night. "French champagne, caviar, music, the beginning of our new life." The insurance money, my $500,000, was deposited on a Wednesday morning. I knew this from the shriek of joy Daniel let out when he checked the balance on his computer. He immediately called the lawyer. "It's here. We're celebrating tonight." It was the signal we had been waiting for. I called the detective. "It's tonight." The next few hours were a flurry of intense preparation. The detective and her team set up an observation post in an empty apartment in the building across the street, with audio and video equipment pointed at my windows. Other officers positioned themselves strategically in my building, disguised as delivery men or visitors. I spent the day at a nearby hotel where I could take a proper shower for the first time in months, eat a full meal, and rest in a real bed. A policewoman helped me get ready, washed and cut my hair. She lent me clean clothes, even a little makeup to hide my extreme exhaustion. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a thinner, older version of myself. But it was still me. Joseph Hayes, 75 years old, survivor. No longer a shadow hiding in a storage room, but a man ready to reclaim his life. At 8 p.m., I received a message. "They're in the apartment, loud music, champagne open. It's time." An unmarked police car drove me to my building. I entered through the back using the same secret passage I had used for months. But this time, instead of hiding, I took the service elevator up to my floor. 2 plainclothes officers accompanied me, keeping a discreet distance. I stopped in front of the door of my own apartment. From inside, I could hear soft music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. For a moment, I hesitated. Not out of fear, but to absorb the enormity of the moment. 6 months of survival, of planning, culminating in this instant. I took the key I had always carried with me, even during my months in hiding. From my pocket, I took a deep breath and opened the door without knocking. 6 months of hiding in the dark, 6 months of survival. It all came down to this single moment, to the turning of a key. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about reclaiming a life that had been stolen. Prepare yourself, because the ghost of Joseph Hayes was about to come home. The scene I found looked like something out of a movie. Daniel and the lawyer were sitting on my sofa, champagne glasses in hand, a coffee table laden with expensive appetizers. In the corners of the room, boxes were already half filled with my belongings, separating what would be worth selling, I imagine. For a second, no one moved. They looked at the door, expecting to see an invited guest. When they recognized who it was, the man who was supposed to be dead and buried on an abandoned ranch, time seemed to freeze. Daniel didn't scream, didn't run, just turned white, as if he had seen a ghost. And in a way, he had. The glass slipped from his fingers, spilling champagne on the carpet I had bought decades ago when Emily and I moved into that apartment. "Hello, son," I said with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "Sorry to interrupt the party. I didn't receive an invitation." The lawyer was the first to react, jumping to his feet. This is impossible. You were dead." "Correct," I completed, taking a step into the room. "In the coffin you made with wood from Emily's store, in the grave you dug on that abandoned ranch of old Mr. Preston's. Is that what we're talking about?" Daniel finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Dad, how did you survive? How did you escape? How are you here now?" I took another step forward. "I'm sure you're curious. After all, you planned everything so carefully, didn't you? The gradual isolation, the tampered medications, the tea with a dose to knock out a horse. It's a shame you underestimated the old man you wanted to see dead." The lawyer started to back toward the door, but was blocked by one of the officers who had entered silently. Another appeared in the kitchen doorway. Daniel, realizing what was happening, tried to change his strategy. "Dad, thank God! We were so worried when you disappeared. We thought you had died." His voice was suddenly choked with fake tears. I shook my head almost with pity. "It's not going to work, Daniel. I have everything recorded. Every conversation about the insurance, about selling the condo, about the other elderly people you killed, every detail of the plan, including the part where you said, 'Next time there won't be a miracle, you stubborn old man.'" His face transformed. The tears dried instantly, replaced by an expression of pure hatred I never thought I would see directed at me, much less from my own son. "You should have died in that coffin," he hissed. "It would have been easier for everyone." "Easier for you?" "Certainly," I replied, feeling an immense sadness despite the victory. "Easier to take my money, my house, everything I built with hard work for decades. Easier than working honestly like your mother and I did our whole lives." Detective Miller entered at that moment, accompanied by 2 more officers. "Daniel Hayes and Mr. Martin Vance, you are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, forgery, racketeering, and other crimes that will be detailed at the station." As the officers read them their rights and put on the handcuffs, Daniel kept his eyes fixed on me, no longer with hatred but with something worse, a complete emptiness, as if I meant absolutely nothing to him. "Why?" I asked, almost against my will. "Not for the money, it can't be just that. Why so much hatred, so much coldness?" For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with a twisted smile I will never forget, he said, "Because it was easy. Because I could. Because you old people are all the same, weak, confused, stuck in the past, a burden no one wants to carry." The words hit me like a punch, not for their cruelty, but for the absolute absence of any human feeling. There was nothing left of the boy I once held in my arms, whom I taught to fish, to drive, to dream, if that boy ever truly existed. "You're mistaken," I finally replied as the officers led him away. "We are not weak. We survive things you can't even imagine." Watching them lead him away, there was no satisfaction in it. You think you want justice. You think you want victory. But when you look at the empty space where your child used to be, and all that's left is this cold stranger, you realize you haven't won anything. You've just survived the final loss. And that's the heaviest burden of all. And if there's one thing I've learned in the last 6 months, it's that even at 75, I'm still strong enough to defeat someone like you. That was the last time I spoke to my son. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The case exploded in the local and then national media. Elderly man presumed dead reappears and exposes murderous son. The sensational headlines multiplied. Reporters camped outside my building. Curious neighbors approached me in the elevator. Old acquaintances appeared out of nowhere wanting to hear the full story. The trial was relatively quick, thanks to the abundance of evidence. The recordings, the forged documents, my detailed testimony, and especially Daniel's impulsive confession at the time of his arrest left no room for doubt. He and the lawyer were sentenced to 30 years in prison each, for attempted murder, plus various other financial crimes. More shocking was the discovery that there weren't just 3 cases: mine, Mrs. Nelson's from Peoria, and the gentleman from Glendale. The investigation revealed a total of 7 elderly victims of their scheme over the past 3 years in different cities in the Phoenix metro area. 5 of them were presumed dead, their bodies never found. Only I, and miraculously Mrs. Nelson, who had been found wandering confused on a highway months after her disappearance, survived to tell the story. When the dust settled, I faced a home that no longer felt like my own. Every corner held a ghost of the betrayal. The armchair where Daniel pretended to care. The kitchen where he brewed his poison. Even Emily's portrait on the wall seemed to watch me with sorrow. I realized that to truly be reborn, I had to leave the tomb he had created for me a second time. Selling the condo wasn't a financial decision, it was an act of liberation. I didn't just sell a property, I sold the painful memories attached to it. I found a small apartment with a sun-filled balcony, a place with no history, where I could breathe again. The financial security was a relief, yes, but the real challenge was rebuilding the architecture of my own heart. The trust that had been shattered, the innocence that had been stolen, that was the real work. For months, I had nightmares about the coffin, waking up sweating and screaming in the middle of the night. I developed an irrational fear of enclosed, dark spaces. Even after moving, I kept all the lights on and the doors open, unable to bear any sense of confinement. A psychologist specializing in trauma helped me process everything. "What you've lived through," she would say, "is something few people could endure without completely breaking. The fact that you're here, relatively whole, is a testament to your inner strength." Little by little, I began to rebuild not just my practical life, but my ability to trust, to connect, to find joy in the little things. I started taking my walks in the park every morning again. I rediscovered the pleasure of reading a good book on a rainy afternoon. I began attending a new craft group where I made sincere friends. Ryan, my guardian angel during the months in hiding, became like a grandson to me. He visited me regularly, sometimes bringing his girlfriend and later their newborn son, who, to my great emotion, was named Joseph, in honor of me. Detective Miller also became a constant presence in my life. At first, out of professional concern, then out of genuine friendship. It was she who suggested I turn my experience into something positive. You have a unique knowledge of how predators target vulnerable seniors. You could help others protect themselves. Thus was born Senior Watch, a vigilance and support group for the elderly that started small with meetings in my living room and grew to become a respected organization throughout the Phoenix metro area. We gave talks at community centers, distributed informational brochures, offered a hotline for reporting abuse and for support. And most importantly, we created a network of seniors who looked out for each other, breaking the isolation that makes so many of us vulnerable. Age is not synonymous with fragility, was our motto, but with wisdom and resilience. At one of these talks, I met Rebecca, a 74-year-old widow who had been through a similar experience, not as dramatic as mine, but equally painful. Her late husband's relatives had tricked her into signing over property, leaving her nearly penniless. We started by talking about our shared experiences, then about books, music, cornbread recipes. I wouldn't call it a romance, we're too old for that nonsense as we joke, but it's a sweet companionship, a mutual support, a safe harbor in a world that so often treats the elderly as disposable. Sometimes, when we're sitting on the balcony watching the sunset, our hands find each other without words, and that's enough. 3 years have passed since that night I resurrected in the middle of Daniel's party. Today at 78, I feel more alive, stronger, and paradoxically younger than I felt before it all happened. I carry scars, of course. Who lives this long and doesn't? But I also carry the certainty that I survived the worst that could happen to me and came out on the other side not just whole, but renewed. If there is one lesson I would like to leave for those who hear my story, it is this. Never underestimate an elderly person. Our bodies may be slower, our skin more wrinkled, but we carry within us decades of experience, of overcoming, of learning. Age may weaken the body, but the spirit of survival only grows stronger when tested. Sometimes, when I walk on the park trail at dawn, I think of Daniel, not with hatred that would only consume me from within, but with a kind of distant pity. He thought he was eliminating a burden, a useless old man who was just in the way of his plans. But what he eliminated was the only person who loved him unconditionally from the first day of his life. What greater prison can there be than the inability to love and be loved? In contrast, despite everything I've been through, I am free. Free to live each day as a gift, to help others in need. Free to feel the sun on my skin and be grateful for another sunrise. Free to be exactly who I am, a 78-year-old man with white hair, laugh lines, hands calloused from work, and a story of survival that I hope can inspire others. I am Joseph Hayes. I am not a victim. I am a survivor. This isn't just my story. It's a testament to the strength that can be found in the most unexpected places, in a safety pin, in the kindness of a stranger, in the heart of an old man who refused to be erased. There are countless stories like mine hidden in the quiet homes on your street. Stories of resilience that need a voice. If my journey has touched you, I invite you to listen to more. Subscribe to this channel and hear from other elders who turned their deepest wounds into their greatest power. Click on one of the videos you see on the screen now, because every story shared is a light that pushes back the darkness, reminding the world to never ever underestimate an old man with a fight still left in him.